Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of On Call Healthcare Interpreter. Sitting here today with Suanny Malautea. Suanny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, thank you for inviting me and having me.
We want to learn a little bit more about your professional experience, but before we do, we want to get to know you a little bit personally. So tell us what languages you currently speak.
I currently speak Spanish and English.
Okay, and you interpret for both of those languages. If you could learn another language outside of those two, what would you learn and why?
I would love to learn Italian. It's very close to Spanish, but it's a very passionate language. I would love to visit Italy one day. So I would like to be able to interact with the locals in their own language.
Wonderful. Love it. And if you could snap your fingers and go anywhere in the world, is that where you would go, or would you go somewhere else?
I would actually go there, but if I could snap my fingers, I would be in Egypt where the pyramids are.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. And last question for you before we jump over to the more professional questions. Your favorite food, what is it?
Oh, my favorite foods. So I'm from Mexico and I love tacos. And so tacos dorados, tacos de suadero, any kind of tacos. I love tacos. So that's my favorite food. It's very diverse and I could probably eat it not just once. I would probably have it for lunch and dinner and maybe even for breakfast.
Yeah, no, it's one of those meals that you really can have almost every day. So
Right.
I hear you there.
Absolutely.
Well, on the professional question side, Suanny, we'll pivot here slightly. Give us a little bit of your background. How did you get started in the interpreter profession?
So I grew up interpreting for my family. I remember being about maybe give or take 10 years. I wasn't doing it professionally, but I started interpreting for my family because there was a language gap. So because of that language gap and my parents being migrants and me going to school, it made it so much easier for my parents to lean on me for trust and also for guidance in regards to the systems, either like the school system or the medical system, or even anything as simple as calling to set up a utility bill. So I started off interpreting in that area. I then transitioned to nonprofit and I interpreted for a nonprofit agency. And I became a human services case manager, and I worked in the human services field as an advocate, office manager, did a lot of administrative for almost a decade. And then I realized that there was a gap in the language. And I'm very passionate of interpreting. And at the time, I didn't know it was interpreting. I would call it translating, which I didn't know the difference. And folks would tell me, "You're translating." I said, "Yes, I am." But I find it very natural for me to be able to assist people with their need and to be able to help them fill in that gap, especially in that language. And it felt very genuine for me since I already had the language, I spoke it, and they were needing assistance. So it came naturally.
Mm-hmm. And so you're interpreting for your family at what age did that start?
It started at around 10, I remember, around 10 years old. I think 10 years old puts you possibly at around fourth or fifth grade.
Okay. And what was that like for you, having to be thrown in as the interpreter?
It was very nerve-wracking. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if I was saying the right terminology. But as I grew up into it and I started interpreting more for my family, it just became a natural flow of mine. It was more of a compassion because I knew that my family needed that. I knew that they needed someone to be there to step in and 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 be that strong voice for them when they didn't have one.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so much for a young child of 10 or a child at any age to be thrown in there and interpreting. And fortunately, that very rarely do we hear about cases where that still happens. I know there's still once in a while where some providers may not request interpreters, and but fortunately, the education of the value of having professionally trained interpreters is now much more widespread and mainstream. So
Absolutely.
kids don't have to,
Yes.
they shouldn't have to be.
Yes, no,
Have to go
definitely.
through.
It's a tough place to be. It definitely is a tough place to be. And oftentimes I remember my parents would have to take me out of school, or I would stop doing homework in order to be able to help them. It was definitely a challenge for me at the time.
When you're interpreting in so many different types of settings, and a lot of times there's really high stake appointments, where you're there interpreting for someone receiving maybe really terrible news, or there could be really good news. There's so many different scenarios that you face every single day. Can you think of a particular situation or setting that stands out, where you walked out of that appointment and you said, just, yes, this is why I do what I do?
There's many. So I will pick one.
Yeah.
I remember helping a specific patient that was going to undergo a medical procedure. She was a little hesitant. Her husband was there. I noticed from the get-go that the family spoke a different language aside from Spanish. That cultural awareness is really important when you're interpreting. So I remember that she seemed hesitant, possibly because of maybe some fears or not knowing what the procedure really in what was going to happen in the procedure, or possibly the provider may not have been explaining it as to the best of their abilities. I knew that both parties were doing their best to understand, and I was interpreting. Um, I noticed though that the short response from her made her seem uncomfortable and hesitant. And it was a very important procedure, one that was very necessary. She would ask questions. It just didn't seem like they were aligned with the right questions or in the right form. As I left the conversation, kind of keep going to see how the flow would go, and then interjected after the provider gave her a diagnosis. And the medical terminology seemed to be a little bit more high up there for her. So she didn't really understand what that term was. I had to take some control of the conversation, pause, turned over to the provider, and I explained to the provider, I said, I get the sense that she possibly does not understand what this terminology is. And it was important because it had to do with the feminine reproductive system. And that body part is very crucial, especially in the culture. And for them, they explained later to the provider, saying, well, in our town, in our place, when this happens to a woman, they are no longer seen as a woman. And that couldn't have come out unless I would have interjected and explained to the provider that she was a little hesitant. She didn't understand what the terminology was. And when she understood what the terminology was, when she understood what the diagnosis was, and the provider explained to her that having this certain procedure didn't make her any less of a person or a human or a female, because her husband was there, she felt a little bit more at ease. She felt more confident, and then decided that she would go ahead with the procedure, because it was definitely a procedure that was needed, but because of the cultural barrier, there was some hesitancy. And as soon as I left there, I remember saying to myself, this is why I'm an interpreter, to be able to bridge that gap, to be able to have, to be able to be a voice for patients who may not be understanding certain things, certain diagnoses, certain procedures, and for them to be able to feel at ease to ask questions, to be comfortable with their providers. So it's moments like those.
Yeah, well, beautiful moment. Thank you for sharing that. Sounds like you've had lots of them in your experience as an interpreter. Another question for you, Suanny, is when you are in appointments, and like similar to what we're talking about, there's a lot of situations where there's can be very high stakes appointments, and there can be a lot of emotion involved. How, as a professionally trained interpreter, how do you maintain your professionalism and stay neutral, even maybe when there are a lot of emotions being shared during an appointment?
Mhm. I remind myself that I do have to be impartial, and I remind myself that I do have to maintain neutral, but that doesn't mean that I have to be cold. I'm still a human being. They're still humans, and that's important for me. It's especially important when the emotions are high because both provider and patient, I'm there to support both of them. And so I want to make sure that they feel supported. I want to make sure that they're supported with compassion. I want to make sure that they are being understood and that the attention that they're seeking is as being clear. So that's very important to me. Hopefully, I'm able to do that in the majority of my appointments so that the message is clear between provider and patient. It doesn't get distorted because of any of high emotions or sensitivity during appointments.
Hmm. And if you could be sitting in front of a bunch of medical providers right now, what's one thing that you would want medical providers to better know or understand about how to better work with an interpreter?
I would say your interpreter is your partner. They are your ally. And if something is not being understood, please feel free to ask us. Or if the patient is not being clear on their answers, it's okay to ask the question, or it's okay to turn to the interpreter and maybe ask a question. Are they not understanding? Am I not being clear? Or asking for feedback at the end of a appointment. That's also great. I've had providers who have towards the end of an appointment have said, was I being clear or did I not make sense? And was my tone of voice appropriate? And that's amazing. That's really helpful to be able to open that door between the interpreter and the provider to give feedback even after an appointment.
Yeah, no, it's great. Great advice. Interpreters really should be part of the care team. I mean, should be seen and are, part of the care team, just
Mhm.
like anyone else.
Yes.
What would be your message of motivation or inspiration for certain interpreters that are maybe thinking about a career as a healthcare interpreter?
My motivation to somebody who is considering to be an interpreter, this is a very rewarding field. Everything is different every single day. I have new experiences. I learn every day, which is very important for me. And we're helping people not just interpret a language, but we're helping people to understand diagnoses. We're helping people to make sure that they do not get misdiagnosed or not have the lack of trust between themselves and a provider, and for them not to have fear. Having a person with them and a voice that can speak what they're feeling, what they are experiencing, and understanding in the healthcare field is very important. I understand for myself, it's kind of scary if I'm feeling a certain way and I don't have the care that I need. And if I don't speak the language, that's scary. So to be able to have language access definitely provides not only compassion, but it also delivers um, equity and access to people so that they can get the right care. And it's a process that I enjoy to grow with, and I'm so proud to be part of the process of somebody's healing, or and to be able to advocate and to walk alongside them and to allow for the patients to have a voice in a system where possibly they may not think that they have a voice.
Hmm. Very, very well said. Beautiful, Suanny. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll go ahead and conclude with that for today. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and share a little bit about your professional story and sharing your experience with us.
Absolutely, you're welcome.